Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder when I drop the kids off at school and deliver an episode to you while I walk home. I'm Brendan Riley. Good morning, listeners. It is a lovely day. It is Friday, April 27th. As my children say, yay, it's Friday. It's the day before International Tabletop Day. So by the time you hear this, it will be several days after International Tabletop Day. But I'm curious to know, hop into our forum on Board Game Geek and let me know what you did for International Tabletop Day. I'm actually going to a one-day academic conference about slasher movies called Celebration of Slashers, which seems like an odd choice to celebrate slashers, but there it is. And then I am going to go play games in the evening with some friends. I believe that we're going to play one or two small games, and the big game of the night is A Feast for Odin, which seems like a tasty treat for International Tabletop Day. I'm looking forward to it. If you haven't played A Feast for Odin, it's one of Uwe Rosenberg's most recent games. He made it before he made Nussfjord, which I haven't had a chance to play yet. But it's got an enormous action selection board, something like 60 choices, and you have a bunch of little Viking dudes, and you put them on the action selection board to take the actions. The innovation that I really like is that you get a varying number of dudes. I think you start with 6 or 5, and then you go up to 8 by the end or something. And when you play them on the spaces, you have to put a number of them on the spaces. So the first column of spaces only takes 1 worker, the second column takes 2 workers, and so on. But the spaces, they give you more if you use more workers. So it's a fun game. I will report how it went, but I'm sure it went great because it was fun. One other bit of what I've been playing news, my wife and I just finished the campaign of Mythos Tales. I mentioned Mythos Tales before in our episode on deduction and induction. If you don't recall, Mythos Tales is essentially a mystery-solving game where you start with a book and a map and a couple other bits of data. And your goal is to solve a mystery by going to locations in the town of Arkham. In particular, you should you go investigate witnesses and that sort of thing. Unlike its progenitor, or its the game it's modeled on, Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, Mythos Tales focuses on stories like those created by H.P. Lovecraft. And so it's got a healthy dose of cosmic horror to it, which works really well for the most part. We liked Mythos Tales quite a bit, or we wouldn't have played all 8 sessions. We did enjoy it. It was a bit frustrating. There were quite a few typos and mistakes in the book. And in a game where clues are an important element, you can't have typos. You can't have lots of them. So I did, after our first game, which resulted in some confusion, I did go on Board Game Geek, and there is a pretty good errata list, which I just went through and fixed everything in the book and everything on the board with a Sharpie. So we didn't run into too much, but there were grammar errors, and that was a little disappointing because the production value on the book itself is really high, really great art. The mysteries are pretty good for the most part. It's a fun play. There's a lot of mistakes though, so I'm not sure I would recommend it over something like Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. But obviously I enjoyed it enough for us to play all 8 episodes. But the theme of Mythos Tales is part of what I enjoyed about it. The cosmic horror, the monsters, the going mad, the random murders, the creepiness, the magic, all of that is really great. At the same time, so that's one of the things that I'm thinking about this morning. The other thing that I'm thinking about is that 2 days ago, the Kickstarter for the new Minis Heavy adventure game Hellboy dropped, and oodalolly, it is tasty. I'm not normally one to go in for minis games like that. In fact, I never have. I have not backed a big minis game like Zombicide or Rising Sun or any of those. The closest I came, I almost backed the World of Smog game, but I decided not to back that. In part because one of the first Kickstarters I backed, I've talked about this, was a game called Tyramid Earthsphere, which was full of minis and didn't go anywhere. I'm still waiting for that game to come out. Although the creators have done their best. It sounds like one of them is each night sitting with an X-Acto knife cutting apart thousands and thousands of tiny little Zeppelins. And eventually we'll be able to get the game, but we probably will have to pay for shipping. So, when they get to the point where they're ready to send the game out, I will pay for shipping because I want to see this thing. But anyway, that's not really what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about Hellboy. So I did back Hellboy. I'm not 100% sure I'm going to go through with it. It's kind of expensive. I think it was $124 or $128. I backed in the first 24 hours, so you get a $10 discount if you do that. After that first 24 hours, that window closes and it's $138. But ooda lolly, there are a lot of miniatures and stretch goals, and there's an expansion or 2 expansions, and oofda, there's a lot going on. It's really very exciting, and Hellboy is one of those comic books that I've read for a really long time. I like Mike Mignola's art, and I really like the stories that it tells, so I just find it very exciting. And if I'm going to go in for a big miniature-laden crazy fest, this was going to be the one. I was a little tempted by Batman, but ultimately I just don't have that much affection for Batman as a story. I sure do like Hellboy as a story. So, all of that said, I'm currently backing that. And it got me thinking a little bit about the idea of theme and the relationship of theme to games. In particular, the idea of taking a theme and making a game out of it versus starting with a game and putting a theme on it. A lot of times when people play Euro games, one of the critiques that is offered is the idea that this or that Euro game has a theme that feels, quote, pasted on, end quote. The idea that the creator really made the game first and then tried to come up with an idea for how to use those mechanisms. By contrast, a game that feels very thematic, where the theme is baked into the rules and the rules seem to reflect what's going on in the theme, is often the holy grail. It's the thing that makes a game really sing for me. Then there are other games where the mechanics seem pasted on. I've played a few of these. You could look at something like, let's say Mice and Mystics. I like Mice and Mystics fine. It's a decent enough adventure game. But ultimately, when you're playing, you have these dice, and they either let you hit something close up or they let you hit something far away. They let you defend. But your character's abilities really just change the number of dice you get to roll, and the level at which the things that's going on in the game really reflects the theme is pretty minor. And so, I think it's not unreasonable to suggest that the mechanisms of the game are pasted on in that case. They had a cool theme idea, but the way the game plays, it doesn't really fit. As opposed to something like Gloomhaven, where the mechanisms of the game feel more natural, that the characters get to do a couple things each round, and the things they can do are determined by which character type they are. That feels much closer to something like a role-playing game, where the mechanisms are entirely meant to represent the experience you're trying to have. So I guess I wanted to talk through a few games in my collection that reflect interesting themes either really well or really poorly. And I'll start with the game that I bought entirely for its theme, and I enjoy despite its weird mechanisms. And that is the game Shark Island. Shark Island, almost from the get-go, as soon as people started seeing it played, got astonished reviews of what is going on with this game. The mechanisms make no sense at all. In part because it's the theme, right? The game is designed as if you haven't played it or don't know it, Shark Island is a one versus many game themed around the TV show Jaws, or the movie Jaws. And it doesn't specifically say Jaws, but it's Jaws. The idea is there's this resort island, and a terrible shark is terrorizing the island. One player represents the shark. The other 2, 3, or 4 players represent shark hunters, people who work for the village or for themselves and their glory, and are trying to find and capture or destroy the shark before it ruins the town. So the problem is that the theme feels more like the shark player is supposed to be making an interesting shark-related movie rather than actually being a shark. But that's not the theme the game portrays. It's not like the shark player is a master storyteller trying to tell a story about a scary monster. It's just, you're the shark. And then at the beginning of the game, you pick a goal. Either your goal is to close a bunch of resorts, or get the mayor fired, or a couple other things. Like, it just doesn't, like, why would the shark want to do any of those things? And then on top of it, as the shark, you also get these weird coins that allow you to buy actions. So you have like currency. And then the combat mechanism, it's sort of like the main designer, Richard Lanius, said, well, as long as I'm making a weird game, I'm gonna make a really weird game, because the combat mechanism is 21. And it's blackjack. You actually played a 23 instead of 21, and it's a little different, but really it's blackjack, which is super weird. So like, the people find the shark, and then they're like, all right, we're gonna have a combat, let's play blackjack. So I wanted to point out Shark Island is a game where the theme is just really so strange, and its relationship to mechanisms is really difficult to parse. Another game that I want to point out where I think the theme really fits strongly is, I guess, one of the top 2 games. I'm actually going to go out of my way not to talk about A Study in Emerald, although I would suggest its theme really fits, particularly the level of crazy rules in the game fit the mechanisms of, it's a game about trying not to go crazy. So, but that's the limit of my talk about A Study in Emerald today. Anachrony is a game which I've also talked about a lot, but I think it benefits from a very strong relationship between theme and mechanisms. That, well, ultimately its biggest twist is this time travel thing, where you can get resources from yourself in the future, and then you have to pay them back later. And the more resources you get from the future, the more likely it is that you'll create a sort of rift in time and cause damage to the world. And one could look at this is just an elaborate borrowing loan mechanism. You know, any Martin Wallace economic game you play, taking loans is a thing that you might do. And when you take a loan, then it's just a thing that hurts you later unless you pay to get rid of it. And that's just the case with Anachrony. The borrowing from the future thing, you get a thing, and then every round that you don't pay it back is potential damage it causes you. That would be the risk of interest. And then when you pay it back, then you're good, and you actually get points for paying it back. So from the perspective of mechanisms, it just feels like a loan. But the way the game works, it feels like you're helping yourself in the past or being helped by yourself in the future. It really does work very well with this idea of time travel as resource management. So I would point to Anachrony as a game where the theme really comes through in the mechanisms in a pretty big way. So as I work on designing games, we think a lot about how the mechanisms of the game we're designing could shape the theme that we choose to use, and vice versa. We've talked about changing themes. One of the ones I'll share with you today, we have a game we're working on called The Egg Merchants of Drag, and it's been in process for a long time now. We've got the rules pretty closely locked. It's well developed, but it's got a ways to go before we're ready to release it publicly. But part of what is interesting about that game to us is the theme is that you're in this world where people are at war, and there are dragon riders, and the dragon riders need dragons. And so you are not a dragon rider, nor a warrior, nor even a king. You're a merchant who sells dragon eggs. And the mechanisms in the game work pretty well. You have these workers that you have to put on the mountain, and then you have to send sheep up the mountain so they can distract the dragons, or else the workers get eaten by the dragons. And then the workers are stealing the dragon eggs for you, and you have to keep them warm so they don't die. But one of the things we've gotten... So in terms of the explanation of why the game works the way it does, it tends to work pretty well, except we have a problem in that when we tell the opening story, and we've heard this from several playtesters and we're still wrestling with how to deal with it, one of the things people expect is they expect to get to see dragons or play with dragons in some way. And in fact, our game never has any dragons in it, or it does not right now. So one of the things we've batted back and forth is how do we experiment with the idea of dragons and have it fit the game we want it to be? Or do we consider changing the theme significantly? But that's very hard to do because, again, our mechanisms are baked into the theme pretty closely. So those are just some of my thoughts on the relationship of theme to mechanisms. I hope that I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. What's a game that you think has either really tight integration between the two or just crazy weird stuff? I'm not as much interested in games where you think the mechanisms are just pasted on, although, feel free to share anything you like in the guild, which is on Board Game Geek. And you can find it by going to Board Game Geek or searching for Pick Up and Deliver podcast on Board Game Geek. Or look up the user Wombat929 and you can find it through there. One of these days I will, or go to the show notes and I will have a link to our guild. One of these days I'll remember to look up before I start recording the number for the guild so you can just go there right after we talk. Otherwise, reach out on Twitter at RattleboxGames or by email brendan@rattleboxgames.com and let me know what you think of the episode and what you think are the games that have the coolest or weirdest themes or the best integration of theme to game. Thanks for listening. I hope your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.